Parshas Vayigash. So in this week's Parsha we have the big reveal. Yosef finally can't keep up the act anymore. He's been sort of leading his brothers along and, running them through this whole saga and sending them back and forth and freaking them out and scaring them and all of these things. And meanwhile, they have no idea that this is their brother who is the leader of Egypt. And then finally, he reaches the limit of his capacity to hold up the act, and he breaks down and he tells them who he is. And if you look at the sequence of things he says, it's very interesting. He sends a message to his father, to Yaakov. He tells him, go up, go home. He asks him, he says, Ani Yosef ha'od avichai. I am Yosef, is my father still alive? Yes. And then he basically wants to tell them, well, go bring him down here. And the sequence of things that he says is specifically, he says, he tells his brothers, because they're feeling, just imagine, they're meeting Yosef decades after the last time they saw him, when they were going to actually kill him, decided, maybe let's not do that. Instead, we'll sell him to slavery forever and never see him again, and God knows what's going to happen. Remember, this is slavery millennia ago. You don't have to go back to slavery millennia ago. You can go slavery today, unfortunately. As terrible as it happens. And I think it's fair to say that as terrible as it is today, as you go further back in time, the level of horror probably gets progressively worse as you go further back in time. That over time, probably once you go back, a few centuries, it probably is pretty much plateau at that point. But, slaves, to say that slaves didn't have human rights the way we look at human rights today is would probably win the award for the understatement of the year. Slaves were property. They were treated like objects. It was horrific. And they sold their brother as a slave to people who don't care about him, who see him as a piece of property, and then they don't see him ever again. And now all of a sudden, there's this guy who says to him, oh, by the way, you remember your brother that you sold as a slave when you decided to be nice and not kill him? Yeah, me. He didn't quite say it like that, but that's basically what happened. And so obviously they're just mortified with shame and guilt and embarrassment. Probably wish that, they'd be swallowed up by the floor. And Yosef says to them, relax, it's fine. I don't hold this against you. This is not your problem. This is not your fault.
He has some bones in him.
Right? There are a few people who are referred to generally as Hatzadik, and he's one of them, Yosef Hatzadik. There are many tzaddikim who are not, yes, he absolutely did. There are many tzaddikim who are, everybody knows they're a tzaddik, but it's not like the way that they're referred to as a standard is so-and-so Hatzadik. Yosef Hatzadik is one of those few people, so yes. And the point that he made, and I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. I'll try to do a bit of a tangent. I'm not very good at keeping my tangents to a bit, but I'll try. Just because this is an important distinction to draw. It's a very important distinction, and that is, two things can be true at the same time. Someone did something wrong that they should not have done, and they are responsible and accountable for the fact that they did something they should not have done. It's also true at the same time that if the thing that they should not have done but did nonetheless and are responsible and accountable for had a negative impact on my experience, Hashem determined that I should have that negative experience or negative input into my experience, because if Hashem had not determined that, that person would not have been able to impact my experience. Right, and this is why the sages say that to get angry at someone is kind of, baby version of idolatry, serving idols. And it might sound a little bit crazy at first, but it's really not. I'm just going to articulate it in a particular way, which is clearly the case, but until we view it that way, It seems like it's an extreme thing to say, but it's really not. If I get angry at someone for doing something maybe inconsiderate and bad and all of those things, and having a negative effect on my experience as a result, or a negative effect on the experience of someone I care about, which is generally why we get angry, right? We don't get, generally, when we get angry at someone saying, my goodness, that person's so selfish, that person's so inconsiderate, that person's such a this or such a that, the reason that we get angry is not because they're inconsiderate. Because if you would observe CCTV footage of the whole world, you'd see millions of people doing inconsiderate things at any given moment in time, and you're not going to feel that level of anger towards all of them. Right? Generally, when we get angry at someone for what they did, it's because what they did had a negative impact on our experience or the experience of someone we care about. That was so inconsiderate, and then the fine print that we might not notice consciously, which is probably the real reason we're upset is, and because you did something inconsiderate, now you cost me this. You didn't indicate at the intersection, you drove halfway through, and then slowed down and put on your indicator, and now that I'm behind you in the intersection, I'm stuck until you turn, and then I have to wait another whole light, whereas if you just put your indicator on 30 seconds earlier, I could have gone around you and not been late for my meeting. Should the person have indicated 30 seconds earlier? Yeah, they should have. But by getting angry at that person for being inconsiderate and making me late to my meeting as a result, ultimately what I'm saying is that person has agency over what happens to me. That person, with their decision to be considerate or not be considerate or to behave in a way that's more or less considerate, has the ability to control what happens in my life. Has the ability to make something happen to me that Hashem didn't plan to happen to me. Has the ability to make something happen to me when it's not what Hashem wanted to happen to me. That's called idolatry. That's saying there is an entity other than Hashem that has the ability to control what happens despite Hashem's interest or despite Hashem's plans, which is called idolatry. So getting angry, a person can make an observation and say, oh, that's interesting, that person did something that wasn't particularly considerate. That's a valid observation. Getting angry, that person was so inconsiderate. Why do we get angry? Because of the impact that it had. Getting angry about the thing that the person did and the impact that it had, that's problematic. Yosef didn't say to them, so just to tie that up quickly in summary, two things can be true at the same time. When someone does something wrong, something that they were responsible to not have done, that was the wrong thing to do, and they are responsible for having done it, and they are accountable to Hashem for having done it. If Torah says they're accountable to man and or based in, then that's the case as well. But that at the same time that person shouldn't have done what they did and is accountable for doing something that they shouldn't have done, as the person who was impacted by what they did, if I have clarity in faith and the way things actually work, there won't be any anger towards that individual. And hypothetically, if I'm going to notice that person's, let's say the fact that a person behaved inconsiderately or irresponsibly or whatever it is, the ideal, way that a person should experience that would be something along the lines of, oh, that person behaved inconsiderately. Interesting observation, comma. Also, apparently Hashem wanted me to be 5 minutes later to my meeting than I had planned to be, which is why Hashem used this as a means to orchestrate that I should be stuck at this light and therefore late to my meeting. And maybe I should be grateful that this person didn't indicate, because had they indicated, Hashem would have found a different way to make me late to my meeting, and maybe that would have been a lot more unpleasant. So here, all that happened is that I'm late. At least it wasn't coming late and, something else worse.
Is this the same idea as, looking at free choice and Hashem having a plan? Like, you're meant to be late to the meeting, but that person had free choice, and if that person had signaled earlier, then there would be some other situation where you'd be late to your meeting?
Yeah. Now, usually when people, raise the question, it's structured a little differently with the emphasis on the same person. So it's my free choice to do something versus Hashem's plan or determination for what should happen with me. All that's happening in this example is what's happening to me and that person's free choice and the impact they have on me, which in reality it's the same thing. It's just a more complicated application. But yes, it definitely would come into that conversation. Do you want me to do like a super express, just sort of bringing those things together? Hashem, we have a degree of agency, the ability to determine what we're going to do, and perhaps to determine what's going to happen as a result. Because Hashem decided that that's the way it should be. That's a real thing. We do have agency. Hashem also, number one, knows what's going to happen, but that's already a lesser, it's still, a bit of a lot of a mind bender, but the thing that's the bigger issue is the fact that we have Hashgacha Pratis. Hashem decides what's going to happen, right? And we always say, well, person messed up and did the wrong thing and made a mistake. It's like, look, it's Hashgacha Pratis. Obviously, it was supposed to work out that way. There's no point, there's no reason to get upset and depressed about having messed up. Look at where you are now. If that wasn't supposed to happen, it wouldn't have happened. Look at what you could do now. What's your responsibility and your options right now in this moment? And let's focus on that. Well, it's like, okay, so then right now, I could just do whatever I want because I messed up before and now I'm saying, well, apparently I was supposed to mess up, so let me mess up now as well. Why not? Apparently, whenever I mess up, automatically I have a get out of jail free card because I was supposed to mess up. So, I think that the clearest sort of this, to me, this way of presenting it is the sweet spot of, not too complicated and confusing, but not too oversimplified and hopefully clear, is, let's say you have maybe a child who has an intolerance to certain food, maybe a child's celiac, right? Or just gluten intolerant. And this child, loves all foods that just pasta and bread is you put this kid in front of pasta and bread and they are not going to have eyes for anything else. And if you just tell them you can't have the pasta and bread and offer them all the other foods in the world, all they're going to do is cry for 3 days. If you're going to take this kid out to eat, let's say, to a restaurant, and it's an Italian restaurant, and they serve lots of bread and lots of pasta and lots of high gluten foods, kind of asking for trouble, right? Now, what you might do is call ahead of time and, say, or one parent runs in ahead, or you call up before and say, look, we're going to be I'm coming in, I'm bringing my child. He just loves high gluten foods. He really can't have them. Is there a way that when you give us a menu, you could give us a menu that just doesn't have any of the gluten-containing foods on the menu? So just give us a menu that only shows, the fish options, the meat options, whatever it is. Now, basically what have the parents achieved by doing that? What they've achieved is the outcome they want is the child should eat foods that are good for their health. And they have now they could come in with a regular menu, and if they want to achieve that outcome, they're going to have to go through, a lot of negative energy for them, a lot of negative emotion on the child's part, and just making things very difficult. When they call ahead of time and say, could you just, give us a menu that doesn't include any of those things on it, now they could have the outcome that they want, and they've avoided all of the difficulty because the child looks at the menu. The child doesn't feel like, and if they come in and say to the waiter, oh, we don't need a menu, we're going to have this and this, the child might say, well, I want to choose what I want. Now what they've done is allowed the child the agency to choose. The child's happy. They chose what they wanted. They're getting a food that they chose. And they're eating something that's good for them. And we've avoided all of this tension and stress and tantrums and negative energy for the parents and negative emotion for the child. So what we've done is selectively given a menu of options to the child that only include options we want them to choose from, and then allow them to choose. Now, it may well be that even within those options, the parents might say to the child, just, pay attention, this option's a lot healthier than that option. And then the child chooses. It's true that we have free choice, but we don't have infinite free choice. If I decide right now, I want to go to the moon, I'm going to be in the moon in 10 minutes. It's like, sorry, too bad. Like, that option's not on the menu for me, right? That's not something that I am at liberty to choose to do. It's just not. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example for clarity's sake, but there are many things that just choices that don't occur to us throughout the day. Any option that we're not supposed to choose, if Hashem is putting both of those options in front of us and giving us the agency to choose between them, that means that both of these choices have a pathway towards the desired outcome. Now, what that means is, if I messed up and did the wrong thing, for me to say I messed up, oh no, I ruined Hashem's plan, again, that's idolatry. I could ruin Hashem's plan. It's like, I'm sorry, get over yourself. It doesn't work that way. Hashem's plan obviously included me doing that wrong thing. That doesn't mean Hashem planned that I should do the wrong thing, but it means that Hashem's plan included option A, which is I do the thing that I should do. Option B was that I do the thing that I don't do, the thing that I shouldn't do. Both of those have a pathway towards the positive outcome. One's more direct, and one's going to require more damage control and correction, etc. So we really do have the choice, and once the choice happened, getting depressed about it is, first of all, in a way, self-centered, or, perhaps not fully or not sufficiently sophisticatedly informed, right? But I have to correct what I did wrong, but there's no way that what I did could derail Hashem's plan, or it wouldn't have been on the menu. Right? So there's divine providence in that Hashem determines things, and then instructed, there are a number of options where we can choose between things that He has put on the menu for us. Make sense? Welcome. So, Yosef, Yosef doesn't say to his brothers, you didn't do anything wrong. He doesn't say that, because that would be a lie. They did something very, very, very bad. What he says to them is, causing all of this pain and suffering on my part. Because that was Hashem's call. You did something, but what Yosef said to them is, don't feel guilty for the outcome of your actions on my experience, because this was Hashem's plan. Hashem's plan was that I should come here and that I should be the ruler of all of Egypt. Now I have become the ruler of all of Egypt, and it's time for, and he's sending this message, choice here. Why? Why is the recommendation that Yaakov should come down to Egypt dependent on or even related to the fact that, sorry?
Like a threat. Like he's threatening them. Like, I am the ruler. Like,
yeah.
Putting them side by side like that, with that statement.
Yeah, and one wouldn't be faulted for seeing it that way. The only thing is that this statement really was part of his message to his father, the message that he was telling them to pass on to his father. But, I mean, yes, but that being said, I think that, if we sort of take a step back and zoom out, Yosef is very clearly, and he took a number of steps to, to calm them and to let them know that, it's fine. Like, relax. I'm not angry at you. I don't hold a grudge. We're fine. But otherwise, yes. And honestly, would it be ideal for him to do that? No. Could we understand? I could. But he didn't. He was better than that. So, question is, what's the connection here? Now, something that, I'm going to bring this back to medicine for a minute. I think it's a growing movement. In my personal humble opinion, I think it's a very positive thing. There's a growing movement within this, within I would say a subset of the, medical professionals, let's say, and research professionals to try to look at things in the context of the bigger picture. So as opposed to, here's a symptom, this is what it means, this symptom related to this organ or this system, what does that mean in the context of this organ or this system, and here's a treatment to address that in the context of this organ and or system and to relieve this symptom. There's more of a movement towards, okay, this is a symptom, let's try to look at the person's whole picture, the picture of their life, the way that they're sleeping, the things that they're eating, their exercise, their, the thoughts and emotions that they're experiencing and going, having throughout the course of their day, week, month, etc. And the more comprehensive a picture we get of a person, the better informed the practitioner or provider is, and then the better a position they're in to offer advice or a suggestion or a treatment recommendation that is based on more information, is going to be more complexly informed, and hopefully, if they're good at what they do, more likely to have a better outcome. There's in this sort of movement, whatever, there are a lot of people that are starting to really try to, and it's not an alternative thing at all. I'm talking about conventional medicine doctors who are just, saying that we have to just open our eyes a little. A person is a person. A person is not a bunch of systems that have nothing to do with each other. We have systems that are all related and connected, and whenever something happens, it's a part of a person. The more we can look at the person as a whole and try to collect as much data as we can about the person as a whole, the better the chance we have of addressing this in a way that's complete and holistic. And again, by holistic, I don't mean alternative. A person's experiencing whatever it is, some sort of symptom or sign, pain, whatever it is, and they come to the doctor and the doctor says, well, you're experiencing this system, it has to do with this, so it's probably that, let's try that. That might be correct and valid, but it might also be missing a lot of important information. And why does it matter? Because it's real. A person is an organism that has anatomy and physiology, right? There's a reason why, what have we learned through medical science over the centuries and, decades and years most recently particularly, but always? Why is it important to learn about how the body works? Because it's real. There's a physiology that's real. The way that these systems work is real, and it matters, and the better we understand how things work and why, the better equipped we'll be to try to address things when they're not going the way that we want them to go. It makes a difference. And what happens in one system, the quality of the insight is going to be. So if we have a question now, right, we're trying to figure out, it seems like Yosef's seeing some sort of specific connection between him being the ruler of Egypt and his father coming down to Egypt. We could sit and look at those two things and try to figure out what's a connection. Can we come up with some sort of explanation that makes sense? Can we suggest a hypothesis for why he presented these things two ways? We could do that. Or we could say, let's try to come up with a hypothesis that makes sense. Let's try to come up with an explanation for why he said this. And in order to do that as effectively as possible and to give us the best, to set ourselves up for success, to have a really, the most valuable insight we can possibly achieve, let's try to step back and look at the whole picture. What's going on? What's the whole deal with the Egypt thing? Why did he end up there? What was the point? What was the plan? What was the purpose? And if we can take all of that into account, we're not going to be guessing in the dark as much, and we're likely to come up with a more complex and sophisticated answer that's not necessarily just more likely to be correct, because you can come up with something that's narrow-viewed and correct also, but more likely to be more holistically correct and taking into account and addressing things from a more fundamental and broad view. So that's what we're going to do right after I take this question.
Oh no, I was just wondering, more of a suggestion, is he trying to comfort his father? It's by saying that, I don't know, coming down to Egypt is a descent. He's literally coming down, and that could be hard spiritually, and it has all these implications, and maybe it's a message of hope. like for an ascent or something. Like
Okay. I mean, that definitely makes sense, and it's a. I mean, I can't fault that suggestion.
or what's the Parsha like trying to say?
So that we're going to have another suggestion too. So what's the deal with the whole Egypt thing? Why did we go to Egypt? Forget why did we go to Egypt. Why are we here? Why did Hashem, absolute infinity, decide to create time and space and a universe within time and space and all these, elements and species, etc., etc.? Like, why? Hashem didn't need any of it. Hashem did that because he wanted to have this novel, unnatural union between matter and spirit. Hashem wanted divinity to be integrated into a reality he created specifically with the intent that it's not naturally predisposed to relating to divinity, which is the reality that we live in and experience consciously. You look around, naturally we don't sense divinity, we don't perceive spirituality. We can understand about it, we can maybe get a taste here and there, but look around, right? By and large, the world broadly does not recognize or wanted this novelty of us bringing divinity into this world, integrating divinity, taking all of these mundane components that make up this mundane world and uplifting them, elevating them, making them divine through using them with meaning and purpose. That's why the universe exists. That's why time and space exists. That's why we exist. And that's why we went down to Egypt. Egypt was a land that was, had many of these, the metaphor that's used for these, divinity that's embedded in the mundane. In Kabbalah, the metaphor that's used in Kabbalah is sparks. Right? A spark is like this tiny little bit of, could potentially be the beginning of a roaring flame, but it's a tiny little bit. And so there are these sparks of divinity buried within and embedded within the mundane. And we went to Egypt in order to elevate those sparks of divinity and extract them from the mundane. If you look back to when we left, right? We left there, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they left with basically all the wealth of the land of Egypt, which they were technically entitled to from remuneration for the centuries of slavery, etc. They had basically largely generated, or whatever, they were entitled to that remuneration for the generations of slavery, and etc. And in the second last of the plagues, the plague of darkness, part of the let's say functional purpose of that plague was that whilst it was dark and the Egyptians couldn't see anything and they couldn't move around, and the Jewish people were able to see, to get around and to see, they went and they basically helped themselves to all the valuables that they were entitled to, but the Egyptians weren't going to give them, and they cleaned out Egypt of its wealth, of its valuables, and took it all with them when they left. And one of the important parts of this feature of the plague of darkness and the fact that they, were able to get a hold of the valuables that they were entitled to and to take them out, is because, and the current commentaries point this out, that Hashem had said to Avram Avinu earlier, Hashem said to him that your children will be strangers in a land that's not for them, and it's going to, it's going to be hard, and they'll be enslaved, and all of this. And then Hashem says, and afterwards, Yetzur b'chush gadol, they will leave with great wealth. And so now Hashem's like getting ready to take them out of Egypt, and it's like, obviously this is, loosely described and metaphorical, etc., but it's like, Hashem's like, oh, hang on, I promised Avram they were going to leave with a lot of wealth. I better take care of that before they go. Okay, perfect. We're going to do a plague of darkness. I'll make the darkness super intense. The Egyptians won't be able to see. They won't be able to get around. And then the Jews can go take all the valuables they're entitled to. Leave. Perfect. Everything works out. Amazing. Question. Do you think if Hashem would come to Avram Avinu at that point and say to him, you see all of your descendants, like millions of people, in excruciating pain and suffering every minute of every day? Like, I could take them out now, or I could say, you know what, hang on a second, let's keep them there a bit longer so they can get some things that are valuable, that have value on the open market. You think Avraham Avinu would have said, yeah, I think they should stay and suffer more at this unimaginable level of pain and suffering so that they can get some expensive things? Likely Avraham Avinu would have said, you know what, forget the valuables, I let you off the hook for that part of the promise, just please take them out, now, this second. But Hashem didn't do that. Hashem made sure to fulfill his obligation to Avraham Avinu. Right, now sometimes what happens is, in reality between people, a person could say, well, remember you demanded that thing? Well, now, I've got to make sure to take care of it. When someone demanded something, maybe the person's angry and says, well, what? You asked for it, I've got to do it. That's not what this was. Hashem wasn't like, well, I promised you, so now I have to keep it. And Avraham's like, please take them out now, take them out now. Nope, sorry, I said I was going to do it. That's not what this was. Right? Avraham Avinu didn't beg Hashem to forget that and take them out. Extracting the valuables from the land of Egypt was an important part of this picture. They went to Egypt to extract the sparks of divinity from within the land. A lot of those sparks of divinity were in the valuables. And in order for them to feel the purpose of being there, they needed to take the valuables with them and then use them for things that they should be using them for, and in doing so to extract those sparks and elevate them. Because they were leaving that land and Hashem's like, we're not going back, we're out of here, we're done. If they didn't take those valuables with them, those sparks would have been left behind, and that's a huge part of the purpose of creation, and it would have just never been addressed. So they had to take those things out of the land of Egypt. Because that's why they were there. Yosef says, well, Hashem sent me down here to make me the leader. Why? He's telling his brothers, this isn't, the fact that I was brought here is not your responsibility. You did something wrong, your issue, your responsibility, but don't feel guilty about what you caused to happen to me. Because that was Hashem's plan. Obviously, if it wasn't Hashem's plan, you couldn't have forced Hashem's hand into something he didn't plan or want. Obviously, Hashem's plan was for me to land up here. Why? Hashem's plan was for Yosef to go to Egypt, become the ruler of Egypt, his brothers come down, as a result of him being the leader of the land while they're there. First of all, by him being the leader of the land, that's how Egypt came up with the plan to be the source of grain during the famine, which is why his brothers came down, and then he had the ability to, run them through the ringer and do all this stuff, and then get them to bring his father down, so that the Jewish people would land in Egypt, which would be the beginning of this whole period of slavery, etc. Or that would be the point of all of which was to extract the sparks of divinity from this land and elevate them to fulfill the purpose of their existence. So when Yosef says to his father, come down to the land of Egypt, right? Why should Yaakov come down to the land of Egypt? Because Hashem has a plan for the elevation of all the sparks and divinity within all the mundane things in this land, which is why they had to take the valuables with them, which was a big part of that purpose. Part of that also was, and a part of that process, and a facilitating factor that made it possible for this to happen was Yosef becoming the ruler of Egypt, controlling all of the economy and wealth of the land of Egypt, and him, first of all, accumulating that wealth for the government and then controlling and managing it, which then put him in a position to set things up. He had basically the wealth of the land at his fingertips, which was a factor that prepared for them to extract the valuables from, to extract the sparks of divinity from within the mundane. So that was an important part of the process. And this is why Yosef says to his father, Hashem made me the ruler of the land of Egypt, come down. Right? What's the point of coming down? To extract the sparks of divinity from within the mundane. Yosef becoming the leader of and the overseer of the entire economy and wealth of the country was an important preparation for that process. So that's why Yosef says, Hashem made me the leader of all of the land of Egypt. I'm at the top of this whole economy and all of this wealth, which sets us up to then do what we need to do. So now it's time for you to come down to Egypt. This is the connection between those two things, and that's the continuity, because they were adjacent sentences. Yosef said, "I'll offer you a good life, come down." But when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, all of a sudden, we see a lot more than that. And again, you see the same exact thing with, in biology, in medicine, in science a lot of the time. And the reason why I find these analogies and equivalences in medicine, in biology, in science so beautiful and fascinating, bless you, is because the reason that that's the case, the reason why when you're looking at something medically, biologically, scientifically, a lot of times you step out, you get more context and it changes things, is because it's real. Right? Not because it says so in a book. The reason that when a person is experiencing pain and they take an analgesic, they take a Tylenol, they take an Advil, the sensation of pain reduces and maybe goes away, is not because it says in a book, if you're in pain, take these medicines, and then because you did what the book said, the book made the pain go away. It's because pain is experienced by way of transmission of messages via nerves, and these medications interact with the transmission of information across nerves, particularly pain messaging. So when you ingest these medications and then they interact with your nervous system and the transmission of pain messaging, you don't feel the pain anymore. It's like a real thing. That's why the more we understand, right, and the more we understand the impacts of things and how they work, right, an example of this would be you have medications that maybe started out as pain medications, then we discovered, you know what, it's also anti-inflammatory. It has all these other benefits as well, and you can use it for other things. Right, because as we zoom out and see more complexity and see more of the bigger picture, we start to see things in a broader context, and it becomes very, very valuable because it's real. Same thing here. Torah is real. What it's talking about is real. Now, if we respect it as being real, it becomes almost so we have the best informed perspective when we're trying to clarify things, to uncover things. It's the same thing here. It's real. And what happens in one place in the Torah affects everything else in the Torah. And this is why, we see things in the Torah, it's like, hang on, it says this here, it says that there. This seems to be contradictory. And you could have someone who will say, whoop-de-doo. Okay, so you found a contradiction in some books. And, okay, so, when the author was writing this, but people get carried away with fantasy authors and stuff like that. And it's like, well, this over here. And then Tolkien, you have billions of hours on YouTube of people debating, he said this in this book, and then in this series he said that, and it seems to be contradictory, and then you have people come up with theories to explain how it all matches, and I was like, you know what? And then you have, his kids who come out and said, well, he actually said he kind of changed his mind and slipped it in, and because he felt like it. This is not that. This is not, the author was in a different mood in this series, and so he presented the history a little differently, or he changed whatever it is. That's not what this is. This is real. Right, if you see medical papers published that contradict each other, or that seem to contradict each other, it's like these are supposedly descriptions of objective reality, or hypotheses on how objective reality works. If there's a contradiction, we need to figure this out. Either one of them is wrong, or our view of the context is wrong, which is why they seem to us to be contradictory or incompatible. Right, that's very different when you're talking about a scientific paper to when you're talking about a fantasy novel. Same thing with Torah. If it says one thing in one place in Torah and something else somewhere else in Torah, and they don't seem to be compatible, if we perceive this as real, if this is real to us, then the question, it's just basic common sense to ask, well, hang on, what's going on? If this is real, something here doesn't seem to work. And either we have to adjust our understanding of one of the statements or the other, or of the context, or of the framework in which we see them, or something, so that we can see how they are compatible. Because if it's real, then the compatibility between the different parts makes a difference, and it matters. And this is why here, it's important to zoom out, take a step back, look at the meaning of the whole picture, look at the broader, let's zoom out as much as we can so we can see the context, our perception of the context and understanding of the context. And more likely, the more complex and holistic the ideas that we're going to come up with are likely to be. Right? A medical provider who sits down with someone who comes with a symptom and asks questions and stops and thinks and asks more questions and stops and thinks and asks more questions and asks more questions, someone who doesn't understand what or why, assuming that they're a good provider, might, wonder like, well, hang on, like, who cares? Like, I have a headache, I want to know which painkiller to take. And meanwhile, this doctor's looking at a person who shouldn't be having a headache, so why are they having a headache? And then they ask some questions, and that makes them wonder, I see a couple of ways that this could be going. Clearly, something in this body is not the way that it should be. Let's get as much information as possible. We could try to figure out what's actually going on. So the more we zoom out and see, well, why were they even there in the first place? Why did the land exist? Why do we exist? What's it all about? All of a sudden, things come together in a very complete, detailed, complex, fascinating and beautiful way where we see, this is real. Like, there's a reason why they were there. And the reason why they were there is very much related to Yosef's statements to his father. They were there to achieve an objective. In becoming the ruler of the land of Egypt, he was facilitating and setting the stage for that objective. So he says to him, I became the leader of Egypt. I'm at the top of the economy and the wealth of this country. We're now ready to start uplifting the sparks within this country and its valuables. Come down to Egypt and let's get this party started.
So does he know that since things are prepared now that he's in a position to do so, does he know it's time to start extracting the sparks because the brothers showed up? Or
that's a good question.
Would it be he would have gone and sought them out because it was time?
So the question, maybe your question's a little different to what I thought it was, but I'm going to zoom out and maybe make the...
He would have said, okay, it's time, I think it's time for me to reach out and bring them down anyway.
It's a good question. I don't know that we know. If I'm going to make a suggestion, my guess is, just looking at it from a practical perspective, if him becoming the ruler was the actual setting of the stage, and then them coming down was like, perfect, all the chips are in place, let's go, it makes sense that when he was in that position and they came down, it was like amazing go time. But had they not come down and he was in that position, perhaps like you suggested, maybe he would have eventually reached out to them and said, okay guys, I'm the leader, why don't you come down here? But let's say, showing up was sort of, all the chips are really falling into place, let's get going. Now, one more thing to just sort of, this is really the cream on the cake. This is the healthy cream on the healthy cake. So, when Hashem comes to Avram Avinu, right, so to speak, and we said that part of the reason for them staying to go through these last, couple plagues, they could have the darkness and get hold of the valuables that they were supposed to take with them, was so that Avram wouldn't come to Hashem and say, well, hang on, you said you were going to give them this wealth. And then on the other hand, we said, well, you would think that Avram Avinu would have been like, forget the wealth. For example, right, when a parent is, maybe has some input into, the way things are going to go for their child. When a parent observes a child going through a difficult experience, right, depending on the details, the specifics, etc., but it's like, this child's going to encounter difficulties in their life ahead of them. It's a fact. It's unavoidable. It is part of reality. And now they're, starting to learn the skills of dealing with those things. They're starting the process of growing and learning how to live a functional life in reality. Or, this is going to make them stronger or tougher, and all of these things. All of those things are true. It doesn't always mean that you'd choose the harder option for them. Sometimes you might be like, you know what, like just let's do the easy thing and then they'll learn next time. Avram Avinu didn't say that. Forefather and ancestor, he doesn't care about the extraordinary pain and suffering they're feeling every day. And the reason that Avram Avinu was, let's say, aligned with Hashem in this view that they should stay and extract the valuables so that they could extract the sparks of divinity within the mundane and those valuables, Avram Avinu was on board not just because of the purpose. Avram Avinu was on board because he was looking at his descendants, his great-grandchildren, whom he loved, and saw that this was the right thing in the interest of their experience. Right? When a healthcare provider, when a good doctor, a patient comes in and the doctor says, asks questions, gets a patient and says, you know what? You should really try to eat more of this food. You should really try to eat less of that food, whatever it is. The doctor, hopefully a good, truly expert and caring provider, is not saying, well, this is what it says in the papers and I want to be your boss and have authority over you, so I'm telling you to do this. What it should be, and hopefully is the doctor saying, well, I'm making this recommendation because this is the right thing to do for your health, and therefore if you do this thing that's good for your health, you're going to end up feeling better. You know what? It's hard work to do the amount of exercise we should be doing every day. It is. It's hard work to eat, by a large majority of good foods when there's a lot of quick, efficient, tasty foods that are terrible for us in our face. It takes effort. It's not easy. That being said, the greater the extent to which we eat the foods we should be eating and do the exercise we should be doing, etc., the better we're going to feel, the better our quality of life is going to be. It's that simple. When we behave and live our lives in a way that's aligned with our biology, things are better. When we live our lives in a way that's aligned with our purpose, when we live our lives in a way that's aligned with the biology of our souls, with the anatomy and physiology and the structure of our souls, things are better. It takes effort. There might be pain in the moment, but the bottom line is, going back to what we talked about a few weeks ago about the whole dopamine thing. It's unavoidable that the ultimate perfect balance and sweet spot of dopamine comes through working hard, and there is no way around that. It's the nature of reality. The greater the extent that we live our lives in a way that is aligned with the structure and the health needs of our neshamas, of our souls, of the purpose for which we're here, the better off we're going to be. The greater our quality of life will be. Not necessarily simpler or more fun, but the more deeply fulfilling, which is something at the end of the day outweighs all of those things. And this is why Avraham Avinu was on board with Hashem, running things this way, because he said, yes, you know what, it hurts me to see them in this pain and suffering, and I wish it could stop right now. But ultimately, by going through what they're supposed to go through and achieving what they're supposed to achieve, it's going to end up net positive for them. And they will end up better off for having gone through that and achieved that than they would have been had they bypassed the difficulties and not achieved what they could have achieved at that cost. Have a good week, everyone. See you next week. It's a shame. You too. Thank you.
It's my favorite holiday coming up, so what book should I get?
Hey, Tavis?
Yes, it's my favorite holiday.
Book in singular?
Books.
Well, it's hard to answer on the fly because I don't know what books you have. I don't know what your specific interests are. I know you like to read a lot.
That's true, that's true. Do you see my Instagram story? I'm always posting books there.
Occasionally. I'm not on there much.
No one should be. Instagram and TikTok are terrible platforms.
What?
They're terrible platforms.
They are. They're also not even closely comparable, though. Like, TikTok is the devil.
Oh, TikTok is...
TikTok and sugar are the devil. Processed sugar in excess, I should say.
Also flour, Rabbi. Not necessarily. Actually, yeah, it's scientifically proven. We read a book.
I think that most people could probably do with a lot less flour. I think it's I think that saying it about excess processed sugar is simpler and requires less fine print and caveats than flour. That's why I said that. But most people would probably do better with a lot less flour. I agree. You're welcome. Thank you.
If when the Jews left Egypt, right, they brought all of the sparks with them, right? That's like why the Jews aren't supposed to go back to live in Egypt because there's nothing there for us, right?
Right.
So why, when like throughout history, the Jews were kicked out of all these different countries, right, because of anti-Semitism, why would it not be the same situation where we're bringing all the sparks with us?
Right. So it's a good question. I would say that they're different in that when it came to Egypt, Hashem told us, your job is here, you don't need to come back. With those other places, like sometimes you have a job, it's partly done, you take a detour and you come back and finish it. Hashem never told us explicitly, you're done here, don't come back. But for Egypt, he did. Right. Right. Clearly, we were supposed to leave, but Hashem didn't say, you're done here, don't come back. For Egypt, he did. You're welcome. Thank you. Let's just do it outside because the teacher's waiting.